It is another complete shambles. After exposing the most shocking conditions in social housing up and down the country, Daniel has now turned his attention to our hospitals of all places, with similar results.
It looks very much like a temporary shack, if you would like, rather than a hospital space for providing acute care.
Water pouring through the ceiling, damp, peeling paint, windows that don't close, heating that doesn't work. Welcome to where we will try to heal you. What we have mostly witnessed is staff just deeply upset that they're forced to try and help people in these terrible conditions. Also on News at 10 tonight. The end of arms control. Vladimir Putin pulls out of the last arms control treaty as Joe Biden arrives in Poland with a trenchant message for the Russians.
Our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire.
The nurses pause strike action as hopes rise of a deal with the government. Top Gun took $1 billion in a month, but Call of Duty the same in a week. The massive economics of gaming as Microsoft fights for a takeover. And back from the front line, the Ukrainian band who have returned to making music.
Music is very important, especially when it's music about Ukrainian war.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Anyone poorly enough to be in hospital surely needs to be treated in a warm, a dry and a safe environment. That's a given, right? Yet, as we are about to see, that is not the lived experience of patients and the NHS staff struggling to treat them in dilapidated hospitals across England. Collapsing floors, leaks, cracked walls, you name it, we filmed it. Our research suggests 50% of hospital trusts have one or more important repair that needs to be fixed. You won't have missed Daniel Hewitt's many shocking reports about social housing over the past year or more, but what he's found in hospitals has shocked us all over again, and doctors have warned us that the safety of patients is being put at risk.
It is not the sound or the sight you expect on a hospital corridor. An industrial bin catching water from a leaking ceiling. It was filmed by a doctor on shift in an NHS hospital, and doctors from trusts across England have come forward to ITV News with evidence of the appalling conditions they are forced to treat patients in every day, with leaks so severe they flood and close corridors, with holes in the ceiling and paint peeling off the walls, where entire wards have become so unsafe they've been permanently shut. This is Beacon Ward at St Helier Hospital in South London, or at least it was. Last year the floors began to collapse, the walls began to crack, and it was condemned. Precious space this very busy hospital cannot afford to lose. Where there isn't danger here, there is disrepair and dereliction.
Thank you.
Consultant Dr. Pauline Swift agreed to show us round this inpatient unit, where the broken doors have to be propped shut by a waste bin.
I feel sometimes like the NHS is just, held together with new licks of paint and plywood. Yeah. There are leaks, a lot of leaks. Paint is peeling off the walls. It looks very much like a temporary shack, if you would like. Our patients, they're not normalised to this, and they come in then and wonder what sort of care are they going to receive. But I can assure you that they receive first-class kidney care here. Yeah. The conditions that we give the care in are not suitable. Not now, not ever.
In November, a different area of the hospital leaked so badly it flooded. Staff shared videos with us of the damage and destruction. And on the maternity ward, this was what greeted pregnant mothers turning up at reception, staff having to work under a bulging sheet of water. But this hospital is not an isolated case. 50% of hospital trusts in England who responded to our investigation had an unresolved structural or maintenance problem in at least one hospital. Some had several issues. In North Tees, they said the building is no longer fit for purpose and presents significant safety issues for our staff and patients. At Huddersfield Royal Infirmary, there is potential for falling stone. At Liverpool's Walton Centre, they've had leaks unresolved for 8 years. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital building in King's Lynn is being held up by 61 temporary props, while Torbay Hospital has significant structural defects in the concrete floors above 2 operating theatres.
My name is Sarah Hills.
And patients are feeling the impact. Sarah was taken to Croydon University Hospital in November for emergency surgery, but was so shocked by the conditions on the ward, she began filming.
And he's growing up and around and up into the...
So that was in the bathroom?
This is inside the bathroom.
Including a tree growing through the toilet window on the ward. But there was a bigger concern.
The first thing you felt was how cold it was. There was no heating whatsoever coming out of any of the radiators on the ward. And these are the non-working heaters. My nose was freezing and it was bitter. So they brought down one portable oil-filled radiator. That was it for a whole ward. I looked up at the ceiling above my head and it was cracked, and it concerned me, would something drop from the ceiling? The staff, my heart just bled for them. How can you try and do a professional job when the fabric of the building around you is literally crumbling?
Croydon NHS Trust apologised to Sarah and said the ward was used temporarily due to exceptionally high demand. New windows and heating have now been installed. Most trusts wouldn't let us in to see the conditions, and we've spoken to NHS staff from across England who say the issues are being played down and even hidden, but fear speaking out. This doctor from the East Midlands agreed to speak anonymously.
It feels like we're always just hoping that the next time something happens, it doesn't cause something catastrophic. I feel like we should all be working in an environment where we know that the roof is going to hold and that everything's going to be fine.
But right now, hospitals like St Helier stand as symbols of neglect, the promise of a new building yet to be met, and the problems an ever-growing stain and strain on a seriously stretched health service.
And Dan is here to talk about all this. It's hard to believe we've just played a report with a junior doctor saying, you know, I should be allowed to work in an environment where the roof's going to hold. It feels like a bit of a minimum requirement, to be blunt. Very shocking. How widespread is your first assessment of, you know, how widespread the problems are, and what's the department had to say about it?
Let's start with the Department of Health, who say they're spending record sums in England upgrading and maintaining buildings. They point to the 40 new hospitals they say they're building by 2030. You remember Boris Johnson promised that at the election. The latest data, though, suggests they've only started work on 7 of them. St Helier is meant to have theirs started by 2025. It's already been delayed by 2 years. There's no sign of a spade in the ground yet. On the question of how widespread it is, well, is it? Well, 50% of hospital trusts in England we contacted came and said, yeah, we have a problem. Some have dozens of problems. Some only have one. Many, though, didn't reply to our request. Some refused to offer information. We know that some hospitals have it much worse than others, though I spoke to one doctor who said that he's worked in 7 hospitals around the country. Not a single one of them has not had a problem with leaks, which seems to be a particular problem in hospitals, older hospitals. The question, though, Tom, here is what's going to be done about it? But this is getting worse. We know it's getting worse because the data shows that in 2012, the cost of clearing the backlog of repairs in England, in the NHS, was £4.7 billion. Today, it's over £10 billion. It's already doubled in a decade. And so we know it's getting worse, this problem.
OK, Dan, something tells me this won't be the last report on this subject for now. Thank you very much indeed. OK, Russia's President Putin must have hoped he would dominate the countdown to Friday's first anniversary of his forces' invasion of Ukraine. But rather like the war itself, he did not have it all his own way today. President Biden saw to that with a speech in Poland making clear the world had not and indeed would not look the other way. For his part, President Putin did up the stakes. He pulled Russia out of the last nuclear arms control treaty between his country and the United States.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
Day 363 of a war that is going nowhere. But if you were waiting for a change of direction from Vladimir Putin, you'll be waiting longer than the hour and 3/4 he harangued his audience. with a familiar roster of grievances against the West. Central to those, that the war his army can't win is all the fault of the West.
I want to repeat this. They started the war, and we used force and are using force to stop it.
But then came the hammer blow to those hoping nuclear arms control may survive this crisis. Russia will now suspend participation in the new START treaty, the only arms control treaty still functional.
Our opponents are not stupid people at all. They want to inflict a strategic defeat on us and infiltrate our nuclear facilities. Therefore, I am forced to announce today that Russia is suspending its participation in the Strategic Offensive Arms Treaty.
To his audience, it may look like playing tough with the West. For the world, it's the first time in more than 50 years there have been no arms control treaties, nor even arms control talks between East and West, as the head of NATO despairingly noted.
Over the last years, Russia has violated and walked away from key arms control agreements. With today's decision on New START, the whole arms control architecture has been dismantled.
Defying his 80 years, President Biden skipped onto a stage in the Polish capital, Warsaw. The images a deliberate contrast with the regimented conformity of what we had just seen in Moscow. The words, too, were a direct riposte.
1 year into this war, Putin no longer doubts the strength of our coalition, but he still doubts our conviction. He doubts our staying power. He doubts our continued support for Ukraine. He doubts whether NATO can remain unified. But there should be no doubt. Our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire.
Biden has ensured that 1 year on, Western unity is pretty much rock solid.
God bless the heroes of Ukraine and all those who defend freedom around the world.
But absent decisive breakthroughs on the battlefield, this war may simply come down to whether it's Biden or Putin who can hold their side together the longest.
And James is still in Kyiv tonight. James, the rhetoric from Putin was aggressive as always, but how significant is the withdrawal from the nuclear arms treaty?
Well, let's start by saying what it isn't. It doesn't look like it's the start of a new nuclear arms race. The Russians have been clear about that tonight. They're not planning to breach missile limits. And probably, frankly, they have neither the economy nor the technology to get into a new arms race with the US. But what it is the steady dismantling of the mechanisms that have allowed there to be a nuclear standoff for the last 5 decades or more without it turning into something much worse. I mean, the Conventional Forces Treaty is gone. The Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty has gone. Now this is the Strategic Forces Treaty in suspension. What we're seeing here is a breakdown of a system that really came in after the Cuban Missile Crisis when the world was pushed to the brink. It's things like verification. It's things like trust. It's things like what to do if there's an accidental launch, all these things. And it's happening at a time of the worst war in Europe since 1945, and we have these two leaders geographically very close, both in Eastern Europe today, absolutely going at each other. Putin making these, some say, unhinged claims about how this war started. Biden saying the only thing that we can do with dictators is say no to them, and all the time no sign of the war ending. I mean, I don't want to send everyone to bed too depressed tonight, but the world is not in a great place at the moment.
No, indeed. James, thank you very much indeed. Well, back here, the media regulator Ofcom has asked ITV and Sky News to explain their contacts with Nicola Bulley's family after police said a body had been found. Ms Bulley's family criticised us and Sky News in a statement yesterday. Ofcom said it had been extremely concerned by the family's comments. The regulator has written to us and to them to find out more and will assess whether any further action needs to be taken. ITV said in a statement it would cooperate fully with Ofcom's request and expressed its sincere condolences to Ms Bulley's family. Within a week of announcing its most severe strike action yet in England, the nurses' union, the RCN, has agreed to put it on hold. That's while they and the Department of Health begin talks tomorrow to try and find a way to end the long and indeed bitter pay dispute. Anushka is here to talk about it all. So, is this a breakthrough or just a break in hostilities?
I mean, I think it is potentially both. It is definitely quite big, and I'm told it comes after a number of constructive meetings between the union and the government since January at all sorts of different levels. But it also comes on the day the government published its evidence for the pay process for the NHS next financial year, so 23-24, and it said on affordability it could only afford 3.5%, which is quite a lot lower than we know the nurses have already rejected in Scotland. So what's going on here? Well, talking to senior people on all sides of this, I do get the impression, although they're not giving me details, that there is something more that is enticing the RCN in there, something perhaps more to be offered on this year. And that's why the Nurses General Secretary, Pat Cullen, has responded very positively to this.
I'm entering this in good faith. I think this is a significant step forward. Every nurse in England today can breathe a sigh of relief, and more importantly, our patients can. So let's get round the table tomorrow.
So look, the RCN very happy, but other NHS unions are not, including big ambulance unions like Unison and GMB. They're saying, hang on, why are they going it alone and the government are only talking to them? Although the contracts are all kind of agreed together, they are worried that there might be some way to give nurses more money and their members less money. Meanwhile, the Department for Education is also offering intensive talks to the National Education Union. We've got more school strikes coming up. I've spoken to senior figures at the NEU tonight. What they say to me is they'd love to talk to the government, absolutely love it, but they're not going to pause their strikes unless they know that those talks will be focused on pay for this year, so for 22-23.
OK, Anushka, thank you very much indeed. One of the candidates to replace Nicola Sturgeon as SNP leader and First Minister of Scotland is fighting to stop her campaign being derailed by criticism of her Christian beliefs. Kate Forbes, Scotland's Finance Secretary, says she would not have voted for the same-sex marriage bill had she been an MSP at the time.
Stepping down as First Minister was a tough decision, but finding Nicola Sturgeon's replacement is proving even tougher. Finance Secretary Kate Forbes is riding high in the polls until she openly admitted that she would have voted against same-sex marriage legislation, and she's standing by her remarks.
I unequivocally apologise for any hurt and offence that has been caused. No political leader is neutral. Every political leader is born of their experience, their background, and I think every potential leader needs to be upfront and open.
But it's her honesty that could be her downfall. Already, several MSPs have rescinded their support, writing on Twitter, "I agree we can't have a party leader who'd vote against same-sex marriage, and we must be full-throated in our support of equal marriage, no if or buts." And many will wonder how this 32-year-old member of Scotland's Free Church will handle progressive policies like banning gay conversion therapy.
Is that something you back? I absolutely condemn the use of coercion in any way.
Even within a religious setting?
I condemn the use of coercion in all settings.
But that's a carefully worded reply, as campaigners say most conversion therapy isn't carried out coercively.
Has it made you question any of your views in how you will be First Minister?
Well, there are very, 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 very few issues that I think should be treated as conscience issues.
But some of them are so fundamental to people in our society.
But you know what's also really fundamental is people being able to feed their kids.
And this causes alarm to her Liberal Green Party colleagues that currently allow the SNP to hold a majority within Holyrood.
We certainly wouldn't continue with an arrangement like Butte House if the Scottish Government was led by someone who didn't share the progressive values that are essential to a modern Scotland.
Kate Forbes' main opposition in the leadership contest is the current Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf, a colleague who won't yet confirm if he would have her in his cabinet.
I'm going to be very upfront, and have been, that any government that I would potentially lead would continue an agenda that's progressive. And if Kate Forbes could guarantee collective responsibility in that sense, then who would not want Kate Forbes in their cabinet?
In 3 days' time, the nominations close, and it will ultimately be up to SNP members to decide who walks through these doors as their next leader. Louise Scott, News at 10, Edinburgh.
The UK's hard-working self-employed have come up trumps for the economy. Last month, they paid more tax than expected, meaning the government took in £5 billion more than it spent. So is this the kind of positive news we've all been waiting for? Romilly has been taking a look at the figures.
Well, Tom, there hasn't been much cheerful economic news over the past few years. This might only be 1 month's figures, but they are at least positive. Essentially, the government made more in tax than it spent in January, leaving it unexpectedly in the black. Let's have a look at the borrowing figures first. This is the total the government has borrowed for the year to January. For the month of December alone, it was £25.6 billion. The OBR forecast a small surplus of £0.4 billion for January. In fact, as you can see, they did better than that, to the tune of £5 billion. So what's behind all this? Well, wholesale gas prices, pushed up by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, have been falling for the past 5 months. If we have a look at where they were pre-invasion, just over £2 a unit. Then they reached a peak in August. Well, today they're around £1.21, below the level they were at before the war. With the government still paying to subsidise energy bills, that is a significant saving. And those aren't the only figures that have exceeded gloomy predictions. If the government is spending a bit less than expected, it's also received more than expected. January should be a good month for public finances, as that is when self-assessment tax comes in. Well, this January was particularly good. The government received a total of £21.9 billion, and that is £5.5 billion higher than the same time last year. But before we feel too upbeat about all of this, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has this word of caution.
Put the whole thing in context, this is still a lot of borrowing. January is still, by historic standards, been a very bad month for the public finances. And of course, what really matters is what happens to the economy over the next 2 or 3 years, and forecasts there have not really improved.
Ahead of the budget, the Chancellor is under pressure to use any unexpected windfall towards putting more money on the table to end the strikes. He gave no hint today, though, that that was his immediate priority, saying, with debt at the highest level since the 1960s, it's vital we stick to our plan to reduce debt over the medium term. Many in his party would prefer to see him cut taxes. January might have given the Chancellor a little more to play with, but it's also going to intensify the competing demands, Tom, for what he should spend it on.
Well, that is some good news, at least by and large. Romilly, thank you very much indeed. In less good news, a sudden shortage in the supply of tomatoes and other salad veg has prompted both Asda and Morrison's to start rationing supplies. Bad weather in southern Spain and Morocco, where tomatoes come from at this time of year, is the main culprit. The same bad weather has also caused ferry cancellations. Cucumbers, lettuce and broccoli are among other items affected. I never thought I'd be reading out an item on rationing tomatoes on this bulletin, but there you go. Life is full of surprises. Now, it could be the plot for a computer game. A big giant pursues his prey only to be thwarted at the last minute. In fact, it is a story of the competition authorities threatening to block Microsoft's takeover of the gaming company Activision, which makes Call of Duty. You probably knew that. So just how big is the gaming industry? Well, around 45 million people across the UK are gamers of one sort or another. I find it hard to believe that statistic, but it's been repeatedly checked today. And between them, they spent up to £5 billion on games over the past year. To put that into context, this man's return to one of the most iconic roles in cinema in Top Gun Maverick saw the film earn $1 billion in just a month. It was the highest grossing film last year. But the war game Call of Duty made the same amount in just 10 days.
Blockbuster games don't come much bigger than Call of Duty. Worldwide, the franchise has grossed $30 billion and counting. It is the jewel in Activision's crown, and Microsoft wants a piece of the action.
Special Forces, 141, they are your brothers now.
But in the UK, the Competition and Markets Authority is threatening to block a deal, which it says could leave gamers much worse off.
I just hope that Microsoft will help and invest more money into Activision for them to create more games like Call of Duty.
If Microsoft were to monopolize gaming, then I could see that as a problem. It depends on where they go next with it.
Today, the president of Microsoft went to Brussels, clutching a promise to make Call of Duty available on the PlayStation and other platforms for at least 10 years. Regulators in Europe and the United States also have concerns about the Activision takeover, but Brad Smith insists there's nothing to fear.
The UK government's own survey of gamers, of consumers, showed that 75% of people want this deal to go through. The second thing I would say is Microsoft entered into 2 agreements today with Nintendo and Nvidia that will bring Call of Duty to 150 million more people around the world than have it today. That's good for people in Britain.
Sony and Nintendo are the biggest players in the games console market. Microsoft's Xbox accounts for just 20% of installed consoles. But the CMA worries that ownership of Call of Duty would allow Microsoft to dominate. And consoles are not the CMA's only problem. 60% of the games people play currently are played on mobile phones, but what's called cloud gaming is becoming more popular, although as it stands, it's only a tiny part of the market. This is cloud gaming. Dungeon Minecraft isn't installed on my phone, I'm live streaming it remotely from a computer server somewhere in much the same way as I might live stream a film. Cloud gaming is in its infancy, but Microsoft has a leading position and the CMA believes owning Activision's games would allow Microsoft to stifle the opposition. The CMA says the deal in its current form would likely lead to higher prices and less choice for gamers. Can you guarantee those things won't happen?
I believe that we can offer with great confidence a future where prices remain low, choices increase. The deal that the CMA reviewed 2 weeks ago is different today.
That may be, but as it stands, Microsoft can only buy Activision if it then agrees to sell Call of Duty, and this is not something Microsoft is willing to do. The CMA will make its final decision at the end of April. John Hills, News at 10, Brussels.
Finally, they have done their bit over the past year volunteering for Ukraine's army. This week, the Ukrainian rock band Antitila returned to the day job, making music in front of an audience in London to mark the first anniversary of Russia's invasion. They hope to drum up support for the cause, and they believe their music has the power to bring about victory sooner.
A song of sorrow, but a symbol of strength. At a time of war, Antitila has become a musical beacon of unity. The Ukrainian band will perform at a vigil in Trafalgar Square, marking 1 year since the Russian invasion began.
Music is very important, especially when it's music about Ukrainian war, very emotional, painful story, and it touches you, touches your heart. I believe helps us to get this victory much more faster.
They're one of their country's most popular groups, and like many famous Ukrainians, they answered a call to arms.
What was it like on the front line?
I couldn't say that, could you imagine? Better you never imagine this. But if you can imagine something that totally changed your life, it was in Ukraine. We became soldiers, volunteers, military volunteers, and our family flew away to more safety places.
Antitila previously joined forces with Ed Sheeran on a track, helping raise awareness of the conflict. Ed then shared singer Taras's number with U2 legend Bono.
And I took a phone. Hi, Taras, it's Bono. It was, oh my God, what is happening? Bono pointed that Ukraine is on the right side of the war. So it was very powerful story. And I believe that Bono and Ed Sheeran will come to Ukraine. They promised to us.
They've taken a step back from combat to go on tour. Taras believes the best way to serve their country and to spread its message is through music. Rishi Dabda, News at 10.
Good for them, and that is it on the night tomato and broccoli rationing was introduced. Don't panic, it's all going to be okay. Good night. Thanks for watching.
Good morning, Britain.